Ladies and gentlemen, less than 100 days until World Chess Championship match will be taken in Singapore. But we have the first game, the first classical game between Ding Liren, the current World Chess Champion, and Gukesh D. He is the challenger to Ding Liren. So they are playing in the Sinquefield Cup. This is a very big classical tournament. Actually, the last year Magnus and Hans were playing, and then the cheating scandal broke the chess world. So, Ding Liren had the white pieces, and he played pawn to e4, which, of course, this is very popular first move, but Ding Liren is almost always going to play d4, c4, knight f3, g3, bishop g2, and he will castle. This is a Catalan opening. He is very familiar with this opening, but probably he is preparing this weapon for the World Chess Championship match, so he decided to play pawn to e4 on the first move. And now Gukesh responded with pawn to e5, symmetrical, simply controlling a lot of space, and this is the meta nowadays at the top level of chess. And as you can see, players have 2 hours on their clock, and additionally, at every move 30 seconds will be added. So, knight f3 attacking the pawn, knight c6, knight c6 defending the pawn, and now there are many options. You can play d4, bishop b5, but Ding Liren chose to play bishop to c4. This is the Italian game, of course. Now there is a move knight to f6 and bishop c5, and Gukesh chose bishop c5, Gucci piano game. Now Ding castled, knight f6 was played, d3 of course, and this is of course very logical continuation. Ding will play c3, he will develop and will try to attack the center, and Gukesh will play a6 or a5, put this bishop on a7, play d6 and castle as well, and this position is very known to all the top players nowadays. So d6 was played, c3 was played, preparing d4 of course, and now a5 was played. Instead of playing a6 to put the bishop on a7, Gukesh played a5, stopping any queenside expansions with pawn to b4. So now rook e1 was played. This is a very logical move, trying to play bishop e3 in some positions. h3 will be played, stopping knight g5 or knight g4 or bishop g4. And now simply castles, h3 of course not allowing any pin to this knight, because when d4 will be played, this knight is very crucial that it's not pinned, because this d4 pawn would be weak if so. So now bishop e6 was played, trying to trade off pieces, and if Ding were to take, then the f file simply opens up for Gukesh, and as you can see, black stands fine in this position. So after bishop e6, Ding played bishop b5. You can see that with the move a5. Now b5 is kinda an outpost for Ding Liren's bishop, which is very nice, but the position is still pretty much balanced. Now bishop a7 was played, maybe trying to play d5 in the near future, and of course not allowing that d4 would come with a tempo. And now if we play d4, something like bishop d7 will play, and this position is very okay for Gukesh, almost slightly better for Gukesh by the computer, because c6 will be played. Of course, this bishop is a very good piece down this long diagonal. So after bishop a7, sidestepping from any tempo, then bishop e3 was played, very logical move, trying to trade off pieces, and after bishop takes e3, Ding chose to take with the rook, and now you can see h3 was very good move indeed, stopping any knight g4 ideas with some queen h4 later on when the knight disappears. So h3 is a very good move in the Italian games. And now knight e7 was played, trying to play knight g6 or maybe c6 and d5 in the near future. And now d4 was played, just trying to take advantage that now e5 pawn is undefended, and I don't know, if something like rook c8, then this pawn would simply be hanging in this position. Wait, maybe not trading the queens, but what was the move here actually? Maybe just knight d2, trying to develop. I mean, you can see the point, this pawn is very weak when the knight is on e7, so knight g6 needs to be played in some positions. So after d4, the pawn is attacked. So knight g6 was played, defending the pawn. That's what I tried to show you. And now Ding simply said that this bishop has done its role, being on b5 and before on c4. So he simply played bishop f1 going back, and these knights on f6 and on g6 can provoke some weaknesses, so g3 is very crucial move in some positions, but then the h3 pawn would be hanging, so bishop on f1 is defending the h3 pawn, which is very, very important. So now d5 was played, and you can see this cube of pawns in the center, and now Ding needs to calculate it. Whether or not to take this pawn, whether or not to take this pawn, maybe to take with the knight, but he chose to play knight b to d2. And of course, if he were to take with the knight, then simply knight takes, and then something like knight takes e4, I believe, is simply just good enough. This pawn is very weak here, so maybe not taking with the knight, but taking like this is bad as well, allowing, of course, a tempo on the rook. But of course, the position is still balanced, but taking this pawn is not very good. So maybe taking this pawn like this, but this is the worst of options, because now simply knight takes e4, and this pawn would be hanging in some positions. So knight bd2 was the best move indeed. Of course, Ding spent like 20 minutes here, which is a very good time consideration, of course. And knight takes e4 now was played, and after retreat happens, everything gets off the board, as you can see. And now pawn to c5 was played, trying to get a lot of space in the center. But as you can see, Ding has some attacking potentials. Maybe rook g6, queen h6 on the way, attacking the pawn, threatening mate, maybe bishop d3 in some positions, attacking h7, and maybe this rook can come like this when c4 will be played. So Ding has a lot of ideas, but if he will be too late, then maybe d4 will be pushed in the center, and Gukesh will consolidate and had a better position. So after c5, rook g3 was played indeed, threatening some queen h6 ideas. But now Gukesh spent 20 minutes and made a horrendous mistake. Pawn to d4 is losing the game. Why? Because, of course, his idea is if he takes, then he will take back with the queen, and queen trade is, of course, very drawish. There is nothing to that, and if now queen h6 would be played, this pawn is, of course, hanging, and it protects the checkmate threat. So, if you take the pawn here, this is very bad for Ding. Or it is a drawish, but it's not as good as you might think. So this is an idea to take back with the queen. But what Gukesh missed is that Ding has queen h6. He saw that, of course, and after g6, now Ding is winning with only one move. Try to find it. It's rook e1, followed by rook e4 and rook h4. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not as simple. Now, pawn takes pawn will be played, or no, excuse me, not here, but rook e1, pawn takes, and now bishop takes a2 can be tried. And after rook e4, a4 can be played. And after rook h4, queen sacrifice itself, and then a3. And how are you going to stop the pawn? This is very important question now. I believe rook to e1 is the best move, and after something like, I don't know, bishop e6, you play rook e1, a2, and rook a1, and this position is winning for Ding Liren indeed. But he didn't like something about rook e1 and this plan of rook lift, so he simply played bishop to d3. And of course, his idea is to play h4, h5, and after the move pawn to c4, of course he saw that, and after bishop e4, d3, I believe that he missed after h4, maybe queen e7, and then h5, then Gukesh has this very important resource. Queen h4 is the only way to keep the game going. Why? Because this pawn is now pinned to the queen, and Ding is simply in a not losing position, but he needs to make a draw rather quickly. So after d3, he simply played bishop takes g6, brilliant move, and after this, he simply made a draw with repetition. So Ding Liren and Gukesh Dommaraju draw their first game at the Sinquefield Cup, but here after d4, Ding was winning for a few moves. Now he should have played the rook e1, and it would be a massive statement to the World Chess Championship match that I will be covering in this channel, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. So rook e1 was the winning move indeed, and maybe it was just better for white, maybe it wasn't winning as much as now I'm saying, but bishop d3 definitely is not a very good move. But okay, these two guys made a draw in their first match. But this is not all that I have today. I will show you Anish Giri versus But this is not the end of today's recap. I will be showing you Anish Giri versus Wesley So with the white pieces. And now Wesley So played pawn to c4, English opening, of course, controlling the center. Now knight f6 was played, knight f3, e6, and pawn to g3, trying to play bishop g2, and he will castle. This is a very, very known theoretical position. And after d5, now the best way of playing is to simply retranspose to the queen's gambit decline with the move pawn to d4, but Wesley played bishop g2. This is known as the neo-Catalan. Of course, it's not Catalan if you don't play d4, but maybe b3, bishop b2 will be played, and this is known as the neo-Catalan. So after bishop e7, castled castles was played, and now b3 was played. And now black has few options. He can push d4 right away, he can play b6 followed by c5, or he can simply play c5 right away, trying to play d4 in the near future. And now bishop b2 was played indeed, controlling this long dark square diagonal. And now knight c6 was played, just controlling this crucial d4 square in the position. And after e3, stopping d4, d4 was played anyway. And after c takes d4, rook e1 was played, of course, just putting this rook on a semi-open e-file, very logical. But as you can see, computer doesn't really like white's opening choice. He thinks black is at least equal in this position. And after rook e8 was played, pawn to d3 is of course still theory, controlling this crucial e4 square. And after a5, of course, after d3, Wesley's idea is to play a3, b4, and c5 in the near future. So Anish correctly played a5, stopping any queenside expansion in this position, which is so important. If, for example, maybe something like bishop d7 was played, this is almost losing because after a3, b4, and c5 will be played. And you can see a3, very quiet move, and the advantage is almost winning. So a5 was the only move in the position. So now knight e5 was played, trying to trade these knights. And now knight d7, of course, attacking the rook. And now, of course, Wesley played rook e1, very logical, very natural move. But the computer really liked this move, rook to b5. Of course, the pawn is now attacked. Now the b7 pawn was attacked. But what is this rook doing? This is so silly move, if you ask me. Why no one would play a rook b5, even Magnus Carlsen, I believe. This rook can easily get trapped on b5. Maybe rook h5 was an idea in this position as well, but of course after knight e7, rook e1 is the only logical move in the position. And after e5, simply controlling a lot of squares and gaining space, of course, knight e3 was played, and white does not have enough space in the position, so he needs to compensate that with piece activity. And of course, knight b5 is a very good square for this knight from a3, and this is ultimately Wesley's idea. Now bishop b4 was played, attacking the rook. Now rook f1, simply trying to go back. Maybe f4 is now kinda threatened, but now knight c5 was played, kinda putting pressure on this pawn with the move bishop f5 on the next move. Now knight b5 is the only move in the position, of course activating the knight. And now rook a6 was the top engine move. No, not yet. Excuse me, but rook a6 is a very natural idea here. Maybe firstly unpinning, but maybe trying to rook lift this rook as well, which is a very common idea, as you see. Now bishop f5, attacking the d3 pawn, and now a3 was played, and of course this pawn is hanging, But as you can see, this bishop is trapped. So bishop c3 is the only move. And now liquidation will happen. Now queen takes d3, queen takes, but rook c1, yes. And now b4, knight b3, and now queen takes d3, the only move. Now in this position, two rooks are hanging at the same time, but yet the computer agrees this is equal. Why? Because bishop takes b7 is on the board, attacking the rook, and now rook a b8 was played, very good move, logical, and now bishop c6 was played, of course attacking the a4 pawn, so bishop takes c4 was played, not moving the rook. Why? Because if something like rook to c8 would be played, then we have bishop takes a4, and no, not bishop takes a4, but maybe just b5 or bishop d7, repeating moves. So of course you can see black will win some material, but these two pawns are so annoying for black and will ultimately decide the game. So simply bishop, after bishop takes b7, this was played, and bishop takes c4 was the best move, and now simply liquidation into this endgame. Rook and opposite color bishop endgame with the same amount of material is usually a draw. So now f6 was played, kinda trying to block this bishop, of course biting on granite on this diagonal, and players quickly agreed to a draw in this position. Moving kings, maybe just repeating some new moves, and this is now a draw by repetition after bishop d7. And Anish Giri managed to draw Wesley so with the black pieces, which is very nice result for the first round of this very important tournament. But I have 3 more games for you. Maxim Vachier Lagrave versus Nepomniachtchi. And of course these are very combative players. So e4 was played by Jan, e5, knight f3, and knight to c6. The most common positions after 2 moves. So now bishop c4 was played, simply Italian, but you can see that this is a Scotch gambit actually. In this position, d4 is not really good move, because now this pawn is hanging as well. So this is simply gambit. After e takes d4, e5 was played. And now the only move in the position is to play pawn to d5. This is very logical, because if something like, I don't know, what can you even play, knight g8, this is simply now losing because of knight takes d4, and if here, then queen e7, and this position is almost much better for white. So d5 was played, now bishop b5, this is still theory, this is not as important, but as you can see, this position is okay for Maxim, but it is very drawish. These pawns on these squares are not really good. This knight is very goodly placed. This knight does not really have a future, so f3 will be a problem for Maxim, but it is ultimately a very drawish position, and f3 happened, knight c5, and f4, trying to maybe expand on the king side. Maybe after f5, queen g4 will be played, which is a very annoying move to face. So castle was played, f5, as I mentioned, maybe f6 was trying to be played, maybe yes, queen g5 and bishop h6 is an idea in this position, and I believe Jan has a very pleasant position. So knight e4 was played, just moving back, knight c3, trying to trade these knights, and now pawn to e6, a very good move, but this allows Maxim to consolidate. And as you can see, Maxim is still in his prep. He has more time than he started with. That means that he knows these positions that he prepared for this game. And of course now the pawn here is hanging, but bishop e3 was played in this, because if you were to take this pawn, then of course I believe simply queen takes queen. No, wait, I need now the edge in help. I'm not as good. Of course, bishop c5 check. After king h1, now you take the queen. And the pawn is hanging here. So bishop takes e6, and these two bishops are really annoying in this position. So bishop e3 was played indeed. Now bishop f6. This is Maxim has started thinking this position now is just a draw. I mean, it's not a draw, but it is very drawish. Now Jan took the pawn, And now knight b4 was played, and this is simply a draw. The bishops will get traded off the board, and there is nothing to play for. This is simply draw by repetition right now. So, okay, not a very interesting game by Jan Nepomniachtchi, but he tried to gambit a pawn, but Maxim was prepared for this variation, so nothing special happened in this game. And now, Praggnanandhaa versus Abdusataro Nordirbeck, a very combative players indeed, youngsters trying to take over the chess generations. So e4 was played, e5, knight f3, knight f6, the Petrov defense, not knight c6 as we saw in the earlier games, but knight f6, a very drawish weapon, but still Fabiano Caruana and Jan Nepomniachtchi has played this opening very, like, they try to play for a win with Petrov's defense as well. So knight takes d5, d6, and now knight to c3. And of course, pawn to d4 is the main weapon, the main line if you want. God bless me. Knight c3 was played, knight takes e3 and d takes e3, and now these two bishops have an open diagonals, which is very nice. And this queen is open as well. So after knight c6, now bishop e3 was played, maybe trying to play queen d2 and then castling long. But okay, bishop e7, and now queen d3 was played, not queen d2, maybe blocking the bishop, so maybe queen d2 was roughly better, or maybe bishop d4 firstly and then queen d3, but okay, this is still prep, so I believe these guys know what they are doing. So after bishop e6, long castles was played indeed, and of course the pawn cannot be captured with bishop takes a2, because with b3, king b2, the bishop is trapped. So after the move castle, a6 was played, maybe trying to attack down the queen side, but now king b1, simply castled, and h3. Of course, h3 is self-explanatory, preventing any bishop g4 ideas. And maybe trying to play g4, g5, and g6, trying to open up the king side. So knight e5 was played, trying to trade these knights, and queen e4 was played, knight takes f3, bishop d3 now, Svischentzug attacking the h7 pawn, which would be checkmate. So knight g5 cannot be played because bishop takes g5 and the mate is still threatened, so you don't win a piece in this position. Of course, if f5, you have queen takes e6, which would win a lot of material. So you cannot win a piece if you are black in this position. So g6 was played, now the move queen takes f3, and the first inaccuracy of the game, pawn to c6, which gives Praggnanandhaa an advantage, but not big. But d4 is, of course, d5, is trying to be played, but c6, maybe there was something else in the position. So h4 trying to play h6, now this pawn is a hook here, that means that after h5 will be played, something will open up. If, let's say, this pawn would be back on h7, on g7, when h5 would be played, then h6 is a possibility. But now when the pawn is on g6, then the pawn would be hanging, so that cannot be played. Now queen a5 was played, a3, of course the pawn was attacked here, well, very logical move, pawn to a3, and now queen d5 trying to trade queens. h5, queen takes f3, g takes f3, and bishop f6. And of course the g6 pawn is defended two times, yes, which that means that black is not losing material, and after f4 trying to play f5, maybe opening up the king. If queens are left the chessboard, that doesn't mean that checkmate can't happen. So rook f e8, now hg, fg, and f5, g takes, and rook h5, of course attacking the pawn, rook e7, and this is still headed towards a draw. Although white is attacking black and has a pleasant position, it's still very drawish, this position, and when the bishops get off the board, this is simply a draw by repetition right now. But I have the last game, the only decisive game of the day, but who won and who lost, we'll see. e4 was played by Fabiano Caruana, playing against French player number 1, I believe, Firouzja Alireza, of course, e5, knight f3, and knight to c6. Today we only saw pawn to e4 as a first move, and this position happened in 4 out of 5 games. So now bishop c4 was played, knight f6, and d3. Of course the pawn was attacked, and this is simply modern Italian game. This is how most of people play Italian positions, not with the move pawn to d4. So bishop c5, c3, d6, and b4 was played. And now you can see that a5 was very important move in the game between Nepomniachtchi, not Nepomniachtchi, but of course Ding Liren and Gukesh D, when b4 could not be played. But after d6, Fabiano can play b4 successfully, followed by a4, trying to trap this bishop and gaining a lot of queenside space in the position. Excuse me. And now a5 was played. Of course, very logical move. But now b5 can be played. And after knight e7, white simply castled. And as you can see, this is still prep. All the time was spent on simply writing down the moves, not thinking so much. So Alireza castled. Knight b to d2 was played. Knight g6, this is still prep. And now d4 was played, which is the best move, and still a prep by Fabiano Caruana. Of course, d4 allows bishop g4, which can be quite annoying, and now queen c2 was played, unpinning, and this is a very normal position out of Italian game when you don't play a5 early. So queen d7 was played, and as you can see, you cannot take this pawn because the knight on g6 is defending the pawn, so there would be zero logic behind this move. So rook e1 was played, rook f e8, and the position is equal. How can be this a very, very decisive game, you might ask? Well, h3, bishop takes f3, knight takes f3, and now the first imbalance of the game, has happened. White has the 2 bishops, but black has 2 knights and 1 bishop. So we have knight versus a bishop position. So e takes d4 was played, c takes d4, no, bishop b2, what? I forgot what happened, bishop b2? Of course, yes, if you take back, then something was wrong with this variation if Fabiano didn't choose it, so maybe, I'm not sure, but bishop to b2 was played indeed. Now trying to take, but now d takes on c3, bishop takes c3, and Alireza is taking over, as you can see. Rook d1, very logical move, but queen e7, and now black is simply up a pawn. These 2 pawns are backwards pawn, that means that cannot really move forward without any consequences, but black is up a pawn. How will Fabiano continue to pressure Alireza, Rook d3, rook e8, rook f3, and bishop d4, and as you can see, bishop d2 was played, and now this pawn is simply a passed pawn. That means that it is only 5 squares away from winning. Of course, this is still a very technically balanced position. It is equal, but if anyone is better in this position, it definitely is Alireza. So after bishop g5, rook b8 was played, putting this rook on a very open file. Wow. Bishop takes f6, g takes on f6, and this king is pretty open. But if white cannot attack this king, then black will simply have a material advantage. So queen c1 was played, trying to play queen h6, attacking this pawn. And now rook b4 was played, not the best move by the computer, but of course attacking everything in white's camp. And now bishop f1 was played, another mistake by Fabiano Caruana, and the time scramble is approaching. Alireza having only 17 minutes left on the clock. Now rook d6 was played, of course defending this pawn, and now rook a4 is a very big threat. But queen h6 was played, and now rook h5 is threatening checkmate, of course. If something like rook a4, then this is simply rook h4, and the position is much better for Fabiano, of course. I don't know what Alireza can do in this position to stop checkmate. Maybe this is not better for for Fabiano, of course. I don't know what Alireza can do in this position to stop checkmate. Maybe... What? This is not losing? Oh, there is queen to a7. Wow, this is the only move in the position, so this is... I mean, I guess it's unfindable if you are Alireza with 13 minutes, but queen f8 was played in this position, the only good move. Now queen h5, another inaccuracy, and the queens, if queens were to come off the board, the position would be winning for Alireza, and he is much better in this position. Now c5 was played, not the best move, but still a4 is hanging. And now rook c1 was played, rook b2, and as you can see, players are making mistakes because they are low on time. Now queen d1 was played, another mistake, passively defending everything. Now rook db6 was played, trying to push everything on the b file, trying to attack Fabiano. And now bishop e2, queen h6, kinda threatening everything on the h file. And bishop b5, king f8 was apparently a mistake, but with 2 minutes on the clock. Now rook c2, rook b4, queen d3, and this is a equal position if you ask the engine. And now rook g8, queen f3, and now queen g6 was played. Both guys under 5 minutes. Alireza down to 1 minute. So, but they are getting 30 seconds every move. Now queen e2 was played. Rook b6, rook b8, excuse me. Bishop b5, and this is a very kinda drawish position, but if Alireza can break through in this position, the game will ultimately end. And there was a repetition 2 times, not 3 times as required. And they are still shuffling pieces. This was a mistake, allowing queen takes f7, but bishop takes f7 was played instead, which is a big mistake. King c7. And now the pawn on f2 fell. And now the bishop is suddenly hanging. What's going on? Rook b4. And now the bishop was taken. And this is still much better for Alireza. But if the pawn is on b3, and Alireza is suddenly winning this position with the 2 passed pawns, and now it is a draw once again. Rook b7 takes. Was a mistake, and now he is losing. There is no more checks. And there is no more checks in the position, so Fabiano simply resigned. Whew, what a game. Alireza is now on winning streak. He has won the only game in the first round of the Sinquefield Cup. So Alireza is in first position. Everyone else have half a point, and Fabiano, the current champion of the Sinquefield Cup, is on 0 out of 1, of course. So guys, this was round 1 of the Sinquefield Cup, and if you like the video, please consider subscribing. It would really help me out, and see you guys tomorrow. Bye!